What would you do if the man who once shattered your dreams invited you to his wedding, then called you on stage to sing in front of the very people who watched you fall? Before she was the woman who made an entire wedding crowd cry with one song, Lena Morgan was just a little girl with tangled curls and wide eyes, sitting at an old upright piano in a small Oklahoma living room, playing for no one but her mama and the dust dancing in the sunlight. Bartlesville wasn't the kind of place you expected to find voices that stopped time. It was all gravel roads, Sunday potlucks, and football on Friday nights. But even in a place that small, people noticed when Lena sang. You didn't just hear her voice, you felt it. It was like she reached into something deeper than sound and pulled up truth. Her mother, Angela Morgan, used to say, "Some voices are born to fill rooms. Yours was born to fill hearts." She meant it too. Angela had once been a bar singer, the kind who never quite made it, but never quite gave it up either. She worked 2 jobs, raised 2 daughters, and carried a notebook full of lyrics in her purse until the day she died. Angela raised Lena and her younger sister Sophie with more love than money, more songs than sermons. While other girls played with dolls, Lena was harmonizing with the wind. At 8, she sang her first solo in church. By 12, she was winning every local music competition. And by 17, she had a full-ride scholarship to the prestigious Chicago School of Music, a dream for any small-town kid, a miracle for one raised on hand-me-downs and hope. In Chicago, Lena bloomed. Her voice, a soulful, golden soprano, carried her through choir halls, recital stages, and jazz clubs on the North Side. She wasn't flashy, didn't need to be. When she sang, people leaned in, like the world had gone quiet to listen. And that's where she met Ryan Caldwell. He wasn't like the musicians she spent most of her time around. Ryan was a computer science major, brilliant, driven, already interning at a Silicon Valley startup before he could legally drink. He was the kind of young man who talked about IPOs and algorithms at dinner, but somehow he always made room for Lena's music. He showed up to every show, front row, eyes locked on her the whole time. He once whispered, "When you sing, everything else disappears." For a while, it felt like a perfect balance, her heart and his mind, her art and his ambition. They'd stay up late in tiny dorm rooms, she'd hum lullabies into the crook of his neck, and he'd talk about building empires. It was messy and magical, the kind of love you only get once, the kind that makes you think it's forever. But forever has a funny way of breaking apart when the stakes get higher. Lena's final year at school was supposed to be her big moment, a solo recital that could have landed her at Lincoln Center or even Carnegie Hall. But fate, cruel and random, had other plans. Mid-performance, she felt something snap inside her throat, a torn vocal cord, the kind that doesn't just hurt, it takes away everything. The doctors were cautious. "You'll sing again," they said, but not like before. Weeks turned into months of silence. Lena couldn't even hum without pain. She withdrew from everything: performances, school, people, and Ryan, at first sympathetic, began to pull away. His startup had just closed a major round of funding. He was flying to San Francisco, pitching to billionaires, chasing the future. And she, the girl who used to sing to the stars, was suddenly just quiet. The final blow came in a cramped cafe booth on a rainy Tuesday. Lena had shown up to surprise him with a new lyric she'd written, still too hoarse to sing, but full of hope. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Your music's beautiful, Lena. But it won't get you anywhere. I need someone who can keep up." She didn't cry in front of him, but something inside her shattered. And once you've broken in that way, not loudly, but quietly, like a snapped string in your soul, you don't go back to who you were. She packed her things, left the city, and went back to Oklahoma. No grand farewell. No closure, just silence. Back home, she found work teaching music at the local community center. Small hands on piano keys, off-pitch voices learning their first melodies, and somehow, in that chaos of children and chalkboard scales, Lena began to heal. Not to sing, not yet, but to exist again, to breathe again. She never performed. Not at weddings, not at open mics, not even at church. Her voice, she believed, was something she had once and lost. But every now and then, late at night, when the house was quiet and the world felt far away, Lena would sit at her old piano, press a single key, and let herself remember, just for a moment, not the applause, not the spotlight, but the way it used to feel, like flying, like freedom, like home. It had been 6 years since Lena Morgan had sung in public. 6 quiet years. 6 years of teaching kids to find their voices while believing she had permanently lost her own. 6 years of watching life pass by in softened tones, weddings she attended in the back rows, songs she couldn't bear to sing, holidays spent with her sister Sophie in their small, plant-filled home in Bartlesville. She didn't regret the choice to return home. Not really. There was peace in the stillness. Joy in small victories like helping a shy 8-year-old girl sing her first full verse without shaking. Lena learned to celebrate the whispers of life instead of chasing applause. But somewhere deep down, she still carried the wound, the one shaped like a stage, a spotlight, and a boy with restless ambition. And then came the envelope. It was a crisp ivory rectangle, tucked between grocery ads and utility bills. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably elegant, almost theatrical. Sophie found it first and slid it across the kitchen table with a quiet, unreadable expression. Lena dried her hands on a dish towel before picking it up. She turned it over slowly, her fingers trembling before she even opened it. Inside, Ryan Caldwell and Vanessa Blake request the honor of your presence at their wedding in Napa Valley. Her chest tightened. The air around her seemed to shrink. Ryan Caldwell, the boy who had once held her hands under star-filled skies, the man who had told her that her music, her soul, wouldn't get her anywhere, the one who walked away when her dreams crumbled, only to build a glittering empire of his own in Silicon Valley. And now, he was getting married. And he wanted her to witness it. She blinked once, then again, hoping the words would vanish. They didn't. Across the table, Sophie watched her carefully. Lena finally exhaled. "This has to be a joke," she said. "Why would they invite me?" Sophie leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Because they think you won't come. Or maybe because they want to see if you'll still flinch." Lena looked down at the heavy paper in her hands, the ink curling like vines around a cruel memory. "I don't owe him anything," she muttered. "No," Sophie agreed. "But you might owe yourself something." Lena didn't respond. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of history, full of old echoes and unanswered questions. Sophie knew her sister well enough not to push. But that night, Lena stood alone by her bedroom window, staring into the Oklahoma darkness. And she thought about it. She thought about all the versions of herself that had been left behind: the hopeful teenager, the conservatory student, the heartbroken girl in the rain. She thought about how many times she had swallowed her voice just to keep the peace, and for the first time in years, she asked herself what closure might feel like. Not revenge, not regret, but release. The next morning, she poured herself a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and said quietly to Sophie, "I'll go." Sophie blinked, then smiled softly. "You sure?" "No," Lena said, "but I need to." The flight to California was uneventful. The car ride to the vineyard was not. The estate was nestled in the rolling hills of Napa Valley, the kind of place built for fairy tales and photo ops. Everything was perfect. The manicured lawns, the string lights hanging from ancient oaks, the long tables adorned with wildflowers and gold-edged menus. Lena stepped out of the car in a lavender chiffon dress that Sophie had picked for her. "Something soft," Sophie had said. "Something strong." She looked at her reflection in the car window and barely recognized herself. She hadn't worn makeup in months. Her hair was pinned back, loose curls framing her face. She looked composed, almost serene. Inside, though, her heart rattled like a hummingbird in a jar. As they approached the reception area, Lena spotted him, Ryan. Taller, sharper. The boyish charm now refined into something more corporate, more calculated. He wore a tailored navy suit and the confident expression of a man who had gotten everything he wanted. And beside him, Vanessa Blake, stunning in that curated magazine cover way. Her smile was bright but didn't quite reach her eyes. When she spotted Lena, her gaze sharpened just slightly. There was no warmth in it, only evaluation. Sophie squeezed Lena's hand. "You don't owe them anything," she whispered. Lena nodded, her jaw tight. They found their seats at a table near the edge of the dance floor, next to Jasmine Lee, Lena's best friend from college and fellow music teacher, who had flown in just to support her. Jasmine raised her wine glass. "To being brave." Lena clinked glasses but didn't drink. Her throat was dry, her palms damp. The evening wore on in polite laughter, champagne toasts, and ambient jazz. But the tension hung beneath every candle-lit surface. People glanced at Lena. Some whispered. Others avoided her altogether. And then, as dessert was being served, it happened. A voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen." Lena turned toward the stage. The man holding the microphone was Trent Parker, a former fraternity brother of Ryan's and now, evidently, the wedding's MC. He had the smug charisma of someone who had always enjoyed the sound of his own voice. "Tonight, we have a very special guest in the house," he grinned. "Someone who used to stop time with her voice." Lena's stomach dropped. She knew what was coming. "Let's give it up for the one and only Lena Morgan." Polite applause, curious glances, then silence. Lena sat frozen. Jasmine leaned in. "You don't have to." Sophie reached into her purse, pulled out a small folded paper, and placed it gently on the table in front of Lena. Lena stared at it. It was her mother's lyric sheet, the one she had carried all those years. The one that still smelled faintly of vanilla and old hope. Sophie whispered, "Your voice was never for him, or for them. It's for you." Lena's hands trembled. Her heart thundered. And for the first time in 6 years, she stood. For 6 years, Lena Morgan had told herself she would never stand on a stage again. And yet, here she was, standing. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes on her as she pushed back her chair. The sound of it scraping against the wooden floor echoed louder than the applause that had just died down. The room, moments before buzzing with champagne and chatter, fell still. She hadn't planned this, hadn't rehearsed, hadn't even sung in front of anyone in years. And yet, something in her had shifted, not with force, but with quiet, stubborn grace. Like a door inside her creaked open, long rusted shut. She walked slowly toward the stage, her lavender dress brushing against her legs with each step, her breath shallow but steady. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ryan stand up slightly, uncertain. Vanessa's lips curled in the faintest smirk, but Lena didn't look her way again. When she reached the steps, Trent Parker, the smug MC, extended the mic with a grin that tried to pass for charming. "Any requests?" he asked, like this was some bar karaoke moment instead of a woman confronting her entire past. Lena met his gaze, calm but unblinking. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll choose." That shut him up. He stepped back, confused, as Lena turned to the small jazz band behind her. Her voice barely carried, but the room was so quiet, everyone heard her clearly. "Do you know Someone Like You by Adele?" The pianist blinked, then nodded. He shuffled his music sheets. A few people in the audience shifted. A murmur moved like wind through the room. Vanessa raised her eyebrows, clearly unimpressed. Ryan sat very still. The first few chords floated gently into the air, familiar, haunting. Lena closed her eyes. For a moment, she was no longer in Napa Valley. She was back in her mother's living room. A little girl in mismatched socks, singing into a hairbrush while her mum stirred spaghetti sauce and swayed to the beat. She was 17, standing alone at a scholarship audition, fingers trembling but voice soaring. She was 21, in a college dorm room, whispering this very song into Ryan's ear as he fell asleep beside her. Her lips parted, and then she sang. The first note was fragile, like the sound of glass before it shatters, but she held it, carried it forward, and something in her cracked open not to break, but to breathe. Her voice wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished or practiced. It wasn't the voice that once won competitions or earned ovations. It was something better. It was true. Each lyric carried weight. Not just the words, but everything underneath them. The heartbreak, the silence, the loss, the years spent wondering if she was still enough. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. She sang for herself, but others felt it too. Jasmine sat frozen at the table, her hand pressed to her chest, tears rolling freely. Sophie's fingers clutched the lyric sheet, now crumpled from her grip. Even Trent Parker had lost his smile. His eyes fixed on Lena, as if really seeing her for the first time. And Ryan. Ryan Caldwell, the man who had once told her she wasn't built for his world, sat with his shoulders slumped, his eyes rimmed red. He looked like someone watching a memory unravel in real time, both beautiful and painful. Vanessa, once smug, now looked small. Not because Lena outshone her, but because Lena wasn't trying to outshine anyone. She was simply standing in her truth. And that was blinding. As Lena reached the chorus, her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. She let the imperfection exist. Let it breathe. Let it live. Never mind, I'll find someone like you. Her voice quivered, then steadied. I wish nothing but the best for you too. She meant it, and that was the part that broke everyone. Forgiveness didn't pour out as a dramatic gesture. It came wrapped in melody, soft, trembling, whole. When the song ended, she held the final note just a moment longer than necessary, not for applause, but for closure. And then silence. Real silence. Not the awkward kind, the holy kind. The kind that comes when something sacred has just happened. No one moved, no one clapped, they just absorbed. And then, as if a wave had been waiting to crest, applause erupted, loud, genuine. Standing, people rose to their feet, some with hands still wet from tears, others in stunned reverence. Lena stood in the center of it all, her chest rising and falling, her hands shaking, her eyes shimmering. She had sung. Not to prove anything, not to win anyone back, but because she finally remembered that her voice didn't belong to Ryan, or to her past, or even to the injury that had once silenced her. It belonged to her. And now it had returned not with force, but with grace. She stepped off the stage slowly. Several guests reached out, brushing her arm, whispering, "Thank you. That was beautiful." Or simply looking at her with a kind of awe that had nothing to do with fame. At the bottom of the steps, Sophie was waiting, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Mom would be so proud," she whispered. Lena collapsed into her arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Behind them, Jasmine murmured, "You were luminous." And somewhere across the room, Ryan stood, but didn't come forward. He knew this wasn't his moment. It never was. Lena wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders. She wasn't just the girl who used to sing. She was the woman who chose to sing again. And in that choice, she set herself free. When the last note faded and the applause washed over her like a tide, Lena Morgan didn't feel triumphant. She felt free. She stood on the edge of the stage, heart pounding, cheeks damp, the microphone still warm in her hand. For a moment, she just breathed. Not the kind of breath you take to calm nerves, but the kind you take when you finally step out of a cage you didn't realize you were still in. And then she stepped down. The reception had changed. You could feel it in the air. The clinking of glasses was softer. Conversations were hushed, eyes red-rimmed and thoughtful. It wasn't just that people were impressed, it was something deeper. Something sacred had just happened in front of them, and they knew better than to treat it like a performance. People she'd never met before reached out as she passed, brushing her arm, whispering, "That was beautiful. Thank you," or simply offering a reverent smile. There was no glitz in their admiration, just human connection. She made her way back toward her table, where Sophie stood waiting, tears still fresh on her cheeks. Without a word, her sister opened her arms. Lena fell into them. They held each other, not like sisters in public, but like survivors of the same storm, like two women who had spent years trying to keep something precious alive between them and had just watched it take flight. "She heard you tonight," Sophie whispered. And Lena knew exactly who she meant. Their mother, Lena Morgan. The woman who once sang in bars no one remembered, but who made sure her daughters always would. Behind them, Jasmine dabbed at her eyes with a cocktail napkin, her smile bright through the blur of emotion. "You didn't just sing, Lena. You told the truth, and they felt it." Lena laughed softly, shaky and overwhelmed. "I didn't even plan to stand up," she admitted. "But you did," Jasmine said, raising her glass. "And you soared." Across the room, Ryan Caldwell stood still. He hadn't moved during the ovation, hadn't clapped, hadn't blinked much either. He just stared not at Lena as a woman he once loved, but as something he couldn't quite define anymore. Vanessa Blake sat beside him, her posture stiff, her wine untouched. Her earlier poise had melted into something harder to name. Was it jealousy, regret, or maybe just the sharp sting of being reminded that no amount of perfection could compete with authenticity? She leaned over and murmured, "She's good." Ryan didn't answer, because he knew she wasn't just good, she was honest. And nothing he'd built, not the startups, not the magazine covers, not this very wedding had ever moved a room like Lena just had. Later that night, Lena slipped away from the crowd and wandered into the vineyard beyond the reception tent. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of ripe grapes and wildflowers. The sky above was a quiet ocean of stars. She needed space, not because the compliments were too much, but because the silence was finally speaking back to her. She let herself feel it all, the ache, the release. The strange, aching beauty of reclaiming something she thought was gone forever. "Miss Morgan?" The voice was soft, male, and unfamiliar. She turned. A tall man in his 50s approached, salt and pepper hair, dark blazer, no tie. There was a gentleness in his eyes, the kind you only see in people who've lived through a few storms of their own. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, offering a kind smile. I had to say something." Lena straightened, still catching her breath. "That was the most honest performance I've heard in years." She blinked. "Thank you." He extended a hand. "Julian Carter. I run the Blue Room. It's a jazz lounge in Manhattan. I was invited here by Vanessa's father. Honestly, I almost didn't come tonight." Lena shook his hand, her fingers still trembling. "I'm glad you did," she said, voice low. Julian nodded, his gaze steady. "I've booked 1,000 voices in my career. Big names. Raw talent. But what you did tonight? That was something else." It wasn't just a song, it was a testimony. Lena swallowed hard. He continued, "I don't say this lightly, but if you're ready, I'd like to offer you a night at the Blue Room. No pressure, no spotlight circus, just you, a piano, and people who know how to listen." She stared at him, not quite believing it. Not because she didn't think she was worthy, but because it had been so long since someone offered without asking for something in return. Sophie and Jasmine, watching from a distance, exchanged wide-eyed looks. Julian added, "Think about it." No need to decide now, but Lena already knew. She nodded once. "I'd be honored." His face lit up, not with business-like satisfaction, but with genuine joy. "Good," he said simply. "The world needs more voices like yours. Real ones." He walked away, leaving her alone again under the stars. But this time, she wasn't carrying silence. She was carrying possibility. Back inside, Sophie met her at the entrance. "Was that who I think it was?" Lena nodded. "He owns a club in New York, wants me to sing there." Jasmine clapped her hands over her mouth. "Wait, the Blue Room?" Lena chuckled. "Apparently, yeah." Sophie's eyes sparkled. "Mom would be screaming right now." "She is," Lena whispered. "Inside me." The wedding continued. People danced. Toasts were made. But for many, the true highlight had already come and gone in the form of one woman, one voice, and a moment that refused to be forgotten. And as Lena sat back down at her table, a quiet realization settled over her. She hadn't come here to be seen. She came to say goodbye to the girl she used to be, to the silence that once held her hostage. And now, a new story was beginning. Not a comeback, not a revival, just truth. And that was more than enough. 30 days. That's how long it had been since Lena Morgan sang at the Vineyard wedding and changed the room with nothing but her voice and her truth. In those 30 days, her life had shifted, not like a storm, but like a tide. Quiet. Steady. Irrevocable. The invitation to sing at the Blue Room still felt surreal. Julian Carter's words echoed in her mind often. "The world needs more voices like yours." Real ones. She wasn't sure if the world needed her, but for the first time in years, she needed this. The Blue Room was unlike anything Lena had ever known. Tucked into a side street in Manhattan's West Village, the club didn't scream for attention. It whispered. The kind of place you stumbled into one rainy night and never forgot. Velvet curtains, a baby grand, candlelit tables, and a stage that didn't feel like a platform, it felt like permission. Julian had offered her a Monday night slot, small crowd, no pressure. "The regulars come for the music, not the names," he'd said. "They'll listen, Lena, really listen." And so, here she was, backstage, alone, wearing a simple black satin dress, her fingers warm against the microphone she clutched. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. No spotlight, no glam team, just her. Sophie had flown in to be there, Jasmine too. Both were seated up front, beaming like proud parents at a piano recital. Lena felt calm, which was strange. She expected nerves, panic, flashbacks. But what she felt was readiness, not to impress, not to reclaim glory, but to be present. Julian's voice buzzed softly through the earpiece in the dressing room. "Whenever you're ready, Lena." She closed her eyes, breathed in, breathed out, and walked out into the light. The crowd was intimate, no more than 40 people, a mix of regulars, musicians, poets, lovers, and lost souls looking for something honest on a Monday night. The room fell quiet as she stepped up to the mic. She smiled softly, not nervously, gratefully. "Good evening," she began, her voice low but steady. "I'm Lena Morgan, and tonight I'd like to start with a song that means a great deal to me." The pianist nodded. The chords began slow, jazz-infused, almost like smoke curling through the room. But it wasn't a cover this time. It was her own song, one she had written in the weeks after the wedding. A song about being broken and brave, about silence and survival, about losing your voice and finding something deeper beneath it. When she sang, it wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Her voice moved like river water, calm, certain, sometimes trembling, always true. and the crowd listened. Not like people waiting for the next act, but like people remembering something they'd forgotten they needed. At one table, a young woman held her partner's hand tighter. An older man near the bar closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. Two musicians in the back exchanged looks of quiet reverence, the kind only artists understand. And Lena, she was free, not from fear that still lingered, but from the belief that fear had the final word. Her song ended in a breath, and for a moment, no one clapped. The silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Then came the applause, soft, warm, earned. Lena bowed her head, smiling through tears. After the set, guests approached her one by one. Not with selfies or autographs, with stories. A woman in her 40s said, "I gave up singing after a failed audition in college. Tonight, I remembered why I loved it." A man with silver hair leaned in and whispered, "That song? That was my story too." Backstage, Sophie hugged her like she never wanted to let go. "Mom heard that," she whispered. "I know she did." Jasmine beamed, eyes glassy. "You didn't just perform, you healed something." Julian stood at the door, nodding with quiet pride. "I told you," he said simply. "Real voices always find their way back." That night, back at her hotel room, Lena sat by the window. New York pulsed outside alive, impatient, endless. She held her phone in her hand, hesitating. Then she typed, "Guess who sang tonight? Guess who's going to sing again?" She hit send to the number of her old voice coach, a woman who had believed in her when Lena no longer did. The reply came almost instantly. "I always knew you would. The voice never leaves." "It just waits." Lena set the phone down. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. She wasn't chasing stages anymore. She wasn't proving anything. She was simply home. Inside her voice. Inside her truth. The Blue Room show was supposed to be a one-night thing, just a quiet Monday set. A gentle welcome back to the stage. But real truth never stays small. And Lena Morgan's voice, raw, broken, rebuilt, had never been just a sound. It was a signal, a beacon, a mirror that made people remember the parts of themselves they thought were gone. And so the ripples began. The next morning, Julian Carter called her. He never used emojis, but this time he ended his message with a single spark. "Phones ringing off the hook, people asking when you're back. We may need to talk about Wednesdays." Lena stared at her screen, laughing through sleepy disbelief. She hadn't sung for applause, and yet something about that night had moved people. Julian wasn't exaggerating. Emails started trickling in, then pouring in. A retired jazz singer in New Orleans wrote, "I watched a clip from someone's Instagram. I hadn't picked up a mic in 20 years. Tonight, I'm going to try again." A young woman from Des Moines messaged, "I'm battling stage fright, but your story, your presence gave me permission. Thank you for not being perfect. Thank you for being real." From Chicago, her old voice coach sent a longer note. "I thought I lost you, but I see now you were never gone." Just becoming. Every message felt like a hand on her shoulder, not praise, not fandom, but kinship. The following week, Lena returned to the Blue Room, this time on a Wednesday. The crowd had doubled. Some people came alone, clutching notebooks and wine glasses. Others brought friends, older sisters, even daughters. One woman whispered to Lena before the show, "She needs to hear this." She's where you were. Lena didn't have a publicist. She didn't post much. She wasn't looking for a stage. But somehow, word spread. Because people don't share perfection. They share what reminds them of themselves. Sophie, watching it all unfold from Oklahoma, began saving screenshots. "I'm starting you a scrapbook," she said over the phone. "This is history." Lena laughed. "It's barely a start." "No," Sophie corrected. It's not a start. It's a return. Jasmine, her best friend and fellow music teacher, flew in for the second performance. They walked the High Line together the next morning, hot coffee in hand, wrapped in scarves, and the early chill of spring. "You realize you're building a movement, right?" Jasmine asked. Lena smiled, watching the city wake up. "I'm just singing." "No," Jasmine said gently. "You're inviting." "To what?" "To come back," she said. "To whatever someone thought they'd lost." That sat with Lena longer than she expected, because she hadn't just found her voice again. She had become a permission slip for others to do the same. And then, one night after a show, something happened that changed everything. A girl approached her outside the Blue Room, barely 20, long braids, nervous energy. She stood quietly, clutching a worn notebook. Lena smiled. "Hi," the girl swallowed. I didn't want to bother you." She paused. "I watched your wedding performance online. Someone posted it. I saved it to my phone. I've probably watched it 50 times. Lena blinked. "You saw that?" The girl nodded. "My mom walked out when I was 15. I haven't sung since, until last week." She opened her notebook. Inside, lyrics scribbled, emotional, half-rhymed, honest. "I wrote this after your first set here. I thought maybe, someday, I could sing it." Lena took the notebook gently. She didn't say good job. She didn't critique the form. She just said, "You already did." The girl's eyes filled with tears. They hugged, there on the sidewalk, beneath the old neon glow of the Blue Room's sign. And Lena understood, in that moment, what her mother once meant when she said, "Your voice was born to fill hearts." Back at her apartment that night, Lena opened her old piano bench, the one she hadn't dared to look inside since college. Inside, her first composition notebook, a folded program from her failed recital. The scarf her mother used to wear at her shows, and a note, barely legible, in Lena Morgan's handwriting. "Don't be afraid of the quiet. It's where the song begins." Lena sat down, pulled the bench closer, and played a single note. Then another, and another, not for a show. Not for a crowd, just for herself. She began writing a new piece that night. It didn't have a chorus yet, or even a name, but it had her truth. And that was more than enough. It was a Wednesday night at the Blue Room. The velvet curtains shimmered under the stage lights, and Lena Morgan stood at the mic, her fingers gently resting on the piano lid beside her. She had just finished her third original song, a slow, aching ballad about leaving the version of yourself that once needed someone else's permission to dream. The applause was warm, familiar. Not explosive, but knowing. Like the crowd wasn't just clapping for the performance, but for the journey. Lena smiled and bowed her head slightly. Her eyes scanned the room in gratitude. And then she saw him, near the back. Ryan Caldwell. He stood alone, hands in his coat pockets, no entourage, no spotlight trailing behind him. Just a man in a dark jacket, staring at the woman he used to love, the woman he'd once told, "Your voice won't get you anywhere." Lena blinked but didn't look away. She didn't freeze. She didn't shrink. She simply breathed. And then she moved on to her next song. After the show, Lena slipped backstage to decompress, towel in hand, water bottle against her chest, heart still beating from the adrenaline. Jasmine peeked in. "You okay?" Lena nodded. "Yeah, I just didn't expect to see him." Jasmine hesitated. "Want me to block the hallway?" Lena smiled. "No, if he wants to talk, he can." "I'm not hiding." 15 minutes later, she stepped back into the main lounge. Most of the crowd had dispersed. A few lingered by the bar. A couple sat whispering at their table, unwilling to leave the warmth of the music just yet. And Ryan was still there. He approached slowly. No swagger, no charm, none of the tech world arrogance that used to hang around his shoulders like a tailored coat. He looked quieter, older, more real.
"Hi," he said. "Hi," Lena replied evenly. For a long moment, they just stood there.
Two people who had once shared dreams, laughter, and broken pieces of themselves. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," he said with a slight smile. Lena raised an eyebrow.
"You think I forget the man who taught me what it means to lose and find my voice?" Ryan looked down, exhaling a quiet laugh. "Fair." There was a pause. Then, "I came tonight because I needed to hear it," he admitted.
"Your voice, not the music, the you in it." Lena didn't say anything. He continued, "I know I don't deserve to ask anything, but I do want to say I was wrong. About a lot of things. About you. About what matters." His voice cracked a little. "I didn't understand it then. But now, after everything I've built, it still doesn't compare to what I saw you do on that stage." Lena listened, not out of pity, but out of clarity. She saw the regret in his eyes, the weight of time, of choices made, but she didn't feel anger anymore. Just distance. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded program. Her name printed across the top. Lena Morgan, live at the Blue Room. "I've been carrying this for 2 weeks," he said. "Didn't know why. Just couldn't throw it away." Lena looked down at it, then up at him. "You don't need to carry me around anymore, Ryan," she said gently. He blinked. "I'm not the girl you walked away from. And you're not the boy I once sang to under the stars. We're not those people anymore." He nodded slowly. "You don't need to explain," she continued. "Not for me. Maybe for yourself. But I'm not holding your choices anymore." Silence. "Not uncomfortable, just final." Ryan swallowed. "I'm proud of you." Lena smiled soft, sincere. "Thank you," she said. "But I'm already proud of me." That was the difference now. She didn't need his blessing. She had her own. Later, back in her apartment, Lena curled up on the window seat with a mug of tea. The city pulsed beneath her, all neon and noise, but she felt still. She pulled out her journal, the one she'd started the night after the wedding. On the next empty page, she wrote, "He came back, but this time I didn't need him to." She paused, then added, "Closure isn't about the other person. It's about knowing who you are, with or without them." She closed the notebook, not with a slam, but with a soft finality. Ryan didn't come to any more shows. And Lena didn't wait for him to. That chapter had ended not with a scream, not with applause, but with a whisper of grace. And for the first time in her life, Lena Morgan stood in her story not as a woman reclaiming something lost, but as someone finally living what had always been hers. Lena Morgan never set out to become anyone's inspiration. She had spent too long hiding from her own reflection, too many years believing her voice was a thing of the past, not a beginning, but a ghost. So when people started saying, "You reminded me who I was," she didn't always know how to respond. But she listened, she received, and slowly something shifted inside her. It started with letters, dozens at first, then hundreds. Handwritten notes, emails, sketches of lyrics scribbled in the margins of notebooks. Stories from people she'd never met, but who seemed to know her intimately, not because they had followed her career, but because they had followed her journey. A single father in Ohio wrote, "My daughter stopped speaking after her mum passed. Last night, I played your song. She came into the kitchen and whispered, 'Play it again.' It was the first word I'd heard in months." A grandmother in Idaho shared, "I used to sing in church. After my husband died, I stopped. Then I heard you. This Sunday, I'm going to stand up and sing Amazing Grace again. For him, for me." A teenage girl from Baltimore sent a YouTube link with a note, "I'm terrified. But I uploaded this because of you." Lena watched the video. The girl's voice shook. Her pitch wobbled. But it was beautiful. Not because it was perfect, but because it was brave. Julian Carter, the owner of the Blue Room, noticed the shift. "Lena," he said one evening after her set, "you don't just perform here anymore, you minister." She laughed, but he held her gaze. "I'm serious. You're not just filling seats, you're opening doors. People don't leave this place the same." She thought about that long after he walked away. She had never wanted to be a teacher, but maybe she was becoming one. One Saturday morning, Lena walked into a local community center in the Lower East Side. A modest sign outside read, "Youth Arts Collective, Saturdays only." Inside, mismatched chairs, dusty keyboards, kids with guarded eyes. She introduced herself to the coordinator, a middle-aged woman with silver locks named Miriam. "You're the Lena Morgan?" Miriam asked, surprised. "I'm just Lena," she smiled, "but I'd love to volunteer." "Just once a week. Nothing fancy." Miriam nodded slowly. "I got a few girls who haven't sung since they got laughed at in school." "Maybe you're what they need." Lena didn't say she understood. She just showed up the next Saturday, and the one after that. She brought no sheet music, no warm-ups, just a circle, a cheap keyboard, and a rule. Your voice belongs to you. No one else gets to say what it's worth. At first, they didn't believe her, but then she told them about losing her voice, about shaking hands at the mic, about the wedding, the vineyard, the man who said she wouldn't make it. They listened, wide-eyed, not because she was famous, but because she was true. One girl, 12 years old, with tightly braided hair and eyes full of thunder, pulled Lena aside after class one day. "They said I sound weird," she mumbled. "Who's they?" Lena asked. "Everyone." Lena knelt down, gently took her hand. "Then I guess the world's not ready for your sound. Make it catch up." That girl, her name was Dea, sang the next week. Off-key, loud, unapologetic. Lena smiled the whole time. Back at the Blue Room, the energy began to change. Lena started inviting a student to perform one song each night. Not as a gimmick, as a gift. Some fumbled. Some soared, all of them glowed. People began coming not just for Lena, but for the passing of the flame. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was multiplying it. Then came the interview request. An NPR producer, who had attended her show 3 times, sent a thoughtful email. "We'd like to feature you on Voices Reclaimed, a segment about artists who've redefined success on their own terms." Lena hesitated. She wasn't chasing headlines. But maybe someone needed to hear. She agreed. The interview aired 2 weeks later, a quiet, 15-minute segment. She spoke about grief, silence, second chances. She told them about Angela Morgan, her mother, who never made it big, but never stopped singing at home. She ended the piece with one line that stuck. "We think silence is the end. But sometimes it's just the inhale before the song." After it aired, the Blue Room's inbox flooded. Julian printed them all and left them in a box on Lena's dressing room table with a sticky note that said, "This is what happens when one person dares to sing again." That night, Lena stood by the window of her apartment, same cup of tea, same city outside, and opened her old lyric journal. She flipped to the back, a blank page. At the top she wrote, "This voice doesn't belong to the past. It belongs to the ones still waiting to be heard." She closed the journal and smiled. Lena Morgan had always believed success was a door you fought to open. But now, at 36, with a voice shaped by silence and survival, she knew something different. Sometimes success finds you. And when it does, the real question is, will you walk through that door and still recognize who you are? It was a Thursday morning when the call came. Julian Carter had just finished wiping down the piano at the Blue Room when he poked his head into the green room. "You might want to take this," he said, holding out his phone.
Lena looked up, still in her sneakers and hoodie. "Who is it?" He smirked. "You'll want to sit down." The call was from a music producer based in Los Angeles, Ava Hart, a woman known in the industry for launching artists whose voices didn't just top charts, but shook foundations. She had been sent Lena's NPR interview by her teenage daughter, who, according to Ava, never listens to anything longer than 30 seconds unless it changes her life. "I've heard 1,000 voices," Ava said, "but you're telling the truth. And people are starving for it." She offered Lena a meeting, studio time, a possible debut album, no rush, no pressure, but the door was open. Lena sat on the edge of the couch, silent. A few years ago, this would have been a dream. Now it felt like a question. Sophie, of course, cried when she heard, "This is everything you deserve, Lena." Jasmine texted in all caps, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Even Julian, usually calm as a cat, grinned. "They're finally catching up to you." Lena smiled, grateful, but inside, something wrestled. She wasn't afraid of failing. She was afraid of forgetting. Forgetting the small voices at the community center. Forgetting the silence that had taught her to listen. Forgetting the moment she realized she didn't need applause to feel whole. Would an album, a tour, cameras, contracts undo that? Would the girl who whispered lyrics in her mother's kitchen still recognize the woman holding a Grammy? She flew to Los Angeles the following week. The studio was glass and chrome, perched high in the Hollywood Hills. The air smelled like eucalyptus and power. Ava greeted her warmly. She was sharp, confident, wearing boots that cost more than Lena's entire wardrobe. But her handshake was sincere. "I don't want to make you a product," she said, looking Lena in the eye. "I want to help you make something true." Lena relaxed a little. They sat at the piano, talked, played, laughed. It wasn't intimidating, it was real. They demoed one of Lena's originals. Ava listened, then said, "I think this could change people. But only if we don't touch the edges." Lena asked, "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ava replied, "we let the voice crack. We let the truth show. No overproduction. No fixing what makes it human." Lena exhaled. That was the answer she needed. Back in New York, Lena stood in the doorway of the youth center the following Saturday. Daya, the 12-year-old with thunder in her voice, was on the makeshift stage, singing a song she'd written herself. Lena clutched a coffee cup and watched from the back. When Daya finished, the room burst into applause. The girl beamed, eyes shining. Afterwards, she ran up to Lena. "Guess what?" she grinned. "My school music teacher asked me to sing at the assembly." Lena laughed. "That's amazing." "I told her I would," Daya said. "But only if I can sing my own song." "The one you helped me write." Lena paused. Kneeling down, she met Daya's eyes. "You didn't need me to write that song," she said. "You just needed someone to remind you your voice matters." Daya nodded, then hugged her. And in that moment, Lena knew something deep in her bones. No stage, no award, no record deal would ever mean more than this. Weeks later, Lena met with Ava again. This time in New York. They went over songs, album concepts, visuals. And when it came time to talk about contracts, Lena made one thing clear. "I'll do this," she said, "but not at the cost of who I am." Ava smiled. "That's why I called you in the first place. The album would come. Slowly. Honestly. It wouldn't be for the charts. It would be for the hearts." In the meantime, Lena kept singing at the Blue Room, kept teaching on Saturdays, kept responding to letters from the broken, the hopeful, the quietly brave. Because success, Lena had learned, wasn't about arriving somewhere. It was about staying rooted, present, and free. One night after a set, a man approached her. Maybe late 60s, flannel shirt, voice weathered. He said, "I lost my wife last year. I haven't cried since the funeral, until tonight."
Lena took his hand.
I'm glad you let it out, she said. He nodded, wiping his eyes. You're not just a singer, he told her. You're a place people go to feel what they forgot. That night, Lena wrote in her journal, I used to think the stage was the destination. Now I know it's just a lamppost on the road I'm walking. The real music. It's in the moments no one records. The lights dimmed. A hush settled over the audience at the Blue Room. The kind of hush that comes not from anticipation, but from reverence. It was Lena Morgan's final set of the year. And this time, she wasn't singing covers. She wasn't even singing an old favorite. She was singing her own song. The one she had carried for years. Through injury, heartbreak, silence, rediscovery. A song that had waited patiently inside her note by note until she was ready. She stepped onto the stage wearing a simple dark blue dress, no glitter, no backup singers, just her, a piano, and a story only she could tell. In the front row, Sophie sat with her hands clasped tight, eyes already shimmering. Jasmine leaned forward, mouthing the words, You got this. Julian stood in the shadows, arms folded, smiling like a man who'd bet on hope and won. Lena took the microphone. She didn't speak right away. She let the quiet settle, then gently, This song isn't polished. It's not perfect. But it's mine, and it took me a long time to believe that was enough. There was no applause, just stillness. She nodded to the pianist, and the music began. The first chord was soft, almost hesitant, like the start of a confession. Then her voice followed low, steady, a little smoky from time and truth. The lyrics didn't talk about fame or revenge. They talked about the girl who used to sing in her mother's kitchen. The woman who once believed she needed someone else's approval to be worthy. The silence that almost swallowed her, and the sound of her own soul saying, Not yet. I'm still here. It was the story of a voice lost, and found, and owned. Midway through, she closed her eyes, not because she forgot the lyrics, but because she wanted to feel every word as it left her. When she reached the chorus, her voice cracked slightly. She didn't stop. She let the crack exist, let the honesty breathe. And the audience? They felt it. People wept, not in sobs, in quiet, guttural release, like they were hearing their story too. Because it wasn't just Lena's voice anymore. It was a mirror. As the final verse approached, Lena opened her eyes. She looked out across the room, a sea of faces, each holding some form of grief, of hope, of memory. She smiled. Then, softly, she sang, I thought the silence meant it was over, but now I know it was just the breath before I sang something true. The final note hung in the air, not loud but clear, a single thread of sound. Unapologetic, unfinished, in the best way. The room remained silent for a beat too long. Then, thunderous, standing applause, not just for a performance, for a testimony. After the show, Lena stepped into the lobby. She was immediately surrounded, not by fans, by witnesses. An elderly couple, married 50 years, held her hands and whispered, That song took us back to when we fell in love. A college student said, I changed my major to music. My dad hasn't spoken to me in weeks. But your voice, it gave me courage. A young man simply said, Thank you. I didn't know I needed that. And then came a girl, maybe 11, with braces and wide, nervous eyes. She handed Lena a napkin with a single sentence written in blue ink. My voice shakes, but I still want to sing. Lena knelt down and said, Let it shake. Just don't let it disappear. Backstage, Sophie embraced her with a kind of pride that had no words. Jasmine cried like she always did, but smiled through every tear. Julian poured her a glass of wine and raised it. To truth, he said. They clinked glasses. Lena sat down, her body tired, but her spirit
full.
This isn't the end, is it? Jasmine asked. Lena shook her head. No, she said.
It's just the first song I sang entirely for me. That night, alone in her apartment, Lena walked over to the framed lyric sheet on her wall, the one their mother, Lena Morgan, had carried for years. She read it quietly, then whispered, "We did it, Mama."
But not for them. For us. She pulled out her journal, now almost full, and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "The voice doesn't ask for permission.
It just waits for you to listen." She paused, then added, "And when you do, it changes everything." In the weeks that followed, the performance went viral, but Lena didn't chase the buzz. She still taught Saturdays, still sang Wednesdays, still walked to her favorite coffee shop in old boots and a hoodie, because she had found something deeper than fame. She had found peace. Months later, at a local high school event, Lena sat in the back row as a girl walked nervously onto the stage. The girl looked down, clutched her lyric sheet, then looked up. She spotted Lena and smiled. Then she sang. Her voice shook, but it rose, and Lena, watching, knew. The story was never about one voice. It was about making space for many. Because when one person dares to sing again, they give permission for others to do the same. The lesson behind Lena Morgan's voice isn't just about music, it's about coming home to yourself. In a world that often measures worth by success, applause, or perfection, Lena's journey reminds us that the most meaningful victories happen when we choose truth over validation. Her story speaks deeply to those who've been silenced, not always by force, but by loss, fear, or the weight of someone else's expectations. Sometimes, silence isn't the end. Sometimes, it's the space where healing begins. For many older adults who've put aside dreams for duty or quieted their voice to survive life's storms, Lena's story offers a gentle but powerful message. It's never too late to speak, to sing, to begin again. Even if your voice shakes, even if no one is watching. Truth, when spoken from the heart, always finds its way into someone else's. So don't wait for permission. Your voice has always been enough.